If you're having a really hard time with cars and you just want to break a 130, keep watching this video because I'm going to give you my tips that help me routinely do that. And also, I'm going to do a quick walkthrough of an AMC passage so that I can show you some of those tips in action. If you don't know who I am, I'm Sanjana or Sanjumuni on TikTok, and I basically just vlogged my life as a pre-med all throughout college, and I got accepted into an early medical program and took my MCAT, so yeah. This is just some of the advice that I've learned and I thought really helped me, and I think it could help you. If you are going to listen to any tip that I give you in this video, let it be this one. And this is all about the perspective you need to have when going into the car section. And that is to find the main idea of every single passage you go into, which is more difficult than you might assume because on the surface, finding the main idea is easy, right? But in reality, a lot of these passages are purposefully made to be really convoluted or really, really boring. So it's like you're reading through it and your brain is going elsewhere because you don't even want to be doing it. But I have a tip for how you're going to find the main idea, and that is literally going paragraph by paragraph. And when I do the passage walkthrough, I'll show you exactly what I do this. But essentially, in layman's terms, after every single paragraph you go through, you really, really quickly want to just repeat to yourself what that author meant by that paragraph. And if you break it down like that, it's a lot easier at the end to put together everything you've read and then really quickly sum up what the entire passage is about. The reason why it's so important for you to actually find the main idea of the passage is because a lot of the questions will somehow link back to the main idea. So even if you get like this really weird question, you don't know where it's going, if you go through the answer choices and you find that every single answer contradicts the main idea except for one, that is probably going to be the answer you want to go with. Or vice versa if the question is asking for which one contradicts the main idea, but we will get into that. My next tip is really important for when you're actually reading the passages, and this is to look out for things called conjunctive adverbs, which sound really alarming and complicated, but what they essentially are just little phrases or words that an author will put in to show a contradiction. For example, the word but, however, although, yet, things like that. And when you're reading the passage, I would like you to read it really animatedly, especially at first when you're trying to implement these tips. And I'll give you an example. So, old scholars used to think the sky was pink. However, that is not true because we now know, because of science, it is blue. The however that you're going to emphasize is really important because whatever is before the however is not what the author wants you to focus on. It's what's after the however. That's what the author's main point is. And the MCAT really likes to play with these terms, especially in a paragraph where things will get complicated. That's exactly the section that you want to focus on because a lot of the questions are going to come from that part. And if you can decipher what the actual main point the author is making there, you're more likely to get questions about that section right. Now, let's turn back to the questions themselves because the MCAT is not only going to be trying to trick you in the passage, they are also going to try to trick you with the way they will ask you a question. And the way they love to do this, in my experience, is via double negatives. So they will ask you some really weird question where you won't understand it at first glance, which is fine. Read it twice, read it thrice, however many times you've got it. But if it's got a double negative where it's like, which one of these answer choices does not contradict the main idea? Then what you're looking for is which one of these supports the main idea. So if you ever see a really weird question that's like, it's taking you a little bit to sink in, I want you to reread it and reword it so that you actually understand it. And this actually leads me to my last tip, which I think is my second most important, if not interchangeable with the most important. But it is to dumb everything down, okay? You want to translate things into layman's terms so you actually understand what they're asking you and what they're presenting you with. And this is actually really applicable to pretty much like any section of the MCAT. If you don't understand what they're asking you, how are you going to answer it? And so I think by getting better at CARS as well, you will get better at other sections just because your reading comprehension will increase. With all that being said, let's go through an AMC passage together. And in my opinion, the only material you should be using to practice the CARS section is the AMC material. I've tried Jack Weston out, I've tried Blueprint out, I've tried UWorld out, and I just find that none of them are really that great. Like, they don't really reflect what the MCAT CARS passages are like. So if you can, attempt to use the AMC material. This is from the MCAT Official Prep CARS Diagnostic Tool, or the CARS Diagnostic Step 2 practice set. Essentially, it's AMC's official practice material. And what I really want to recommend to you guys is getting the Jack Weston Chrome extension, so that when you are going through all this material, it's going to show up just like this, which is how it would show up on the MCAT. Essentially, it'll fix the formatting for you, and it will show you guys solutions, not only the AMC one, but the Jack Weston's one, which show you it basically in layman's terms, and I find that their explanations can be a lot more helpful than the AMC explanations to solutions, not only on cars, but in general, just on everything. Alright, so let's start reading this together, and while we're doing so, I'll also mention to you guys what I think is important to highlight, because if you over-highlight during this, then it's really hard to actually refer back to what you need to. So let's go through this, and sorry if me reading through this sounds a little bit weird. I haven't been asked to read it aloud in a very, very long time, since like high school, so sorry if anything sounds weird. In the 80s, more paper wealth was generated in New York than in any other city at any other time in human history. Green mail, junk bonds, leverage, and the precarious liquidity of an overgeared credit economy transformed the art world into the art industry. So, transform the art world into the art industry. While it's not anything like substantive, I think it shows something really important. So we're seeing a transformation from the art world into the art industry. But what is that transformation? What does that entail, essentially? So, 20 years before, the idea that any work of art made in the previous century would sell for $1 million had seemed like science fiction to most people. Today, when most people pay $5 or $10 million for a modern painting, the event rates no more than a sentence or two in the auction reports of the New York Times. We have come to take it for granted that art should be alienatingly expensive. It seems normal that its price should violate our sense of decency. So, we know, based on this paragraph, that this is about money, right? So, let's look at what we want to highlight. 20 years before, the idea that any work of art the previous century would sell for $1 million seemed like science fiction. So, sell for $1 million seems like science fiction. Previously, nobody would, in their right mind, essentially, be paying that much money for art. But today, highlight that, it seems normal, basically, no more than a sentence or two in the New York Times. And once you get really good at highlighting and reading through these passages, you don't have to be highlighting like so slowly. You don't have to go back into the paragraph to highlight it. You'll probably do it while you're reading, because you'll just be used to this kind of stuff. You'll be able to pick it up really quickly. Although art has always been a commodity, it loses inherent value and its social use when it is only treated as such. So I'm gonna highlight that because that sounds important. Oh my god, please highlight. To lock it into a market circus is to lock people out of contemplating it, which this is basically an explanation for that, so you don't need to go overboard and highlight that as well. Basically, when you're highlighting like the main point, you don't have to highlight the supplementary material, because highlighting the main point, you'll know where to essentially locate it. This inexorable process tends to collapse the nuances of meaning and visual experience under the brute weight of price. So that's the explanation. This process of commercializing it is going to essentially take away all its actual meaning, its actual value, because it's so expensive. It is not a compliment to the work. If there were only one copy of each book in the world fought over by multimillionaires and investment trusts and then hidden in storage, what would happen to one's sense of literature, the tissue of its meanings that sustains a common discourse? Where works of art are rare, young Goethe wrote on his first visiting Naples, rarity itself is a value. It is only when they are common that one can learn their intrinsic worth. The truth of these words is very nearly lost on us in a culture wrecked by its own commercialization. What strip mining is to nature, the art market has become to culture. So, basically this author looks very down upon the idea of commercializing art. Right? He's basically saying, once you put a price on it, it's going to lock people out of contemplating it. So basically, it's so expensive that people can no longer take value out of it, because The expense is a barrier now. Its expense is going to rip all meaning away from it, and it's no longer going to be valuable when it is so expensive. The art market boom has been an unmitigated disaster for the public life of art. It has distorted the ground of people's reaction to painting and sculpture. In 1960, anyone, amateur or expert, could spend an hour or two in a museum without wondering what this Tiepolo, this Rembrandt, this de Kooning might cost at an auction. So, in 1960, this was the norm. Anybody could go in and they wouldn't even care about the price. Thanks to the unrelenting propaganda of the art market, this is no longer quite the case, and the imagery of money has been so crudely riveted onto the face of museum quality art by events outside the museum that its unhappy confusion between price and value may never be resolved. Another key point is to notice words like crudely, unhappy. These descriptors are really telling of the author's opinion. You're able to tell he doesn't think very positively of whatever he's saying. Moreover, there are many areas in which American museums can no longer buy. They voice a litany of complaints, a wrenching sense of disenfranchisement and weakness, as their once adequate annual buying budgets of $2 to $5 billion are turned into chicken feed by art inflation. And as the museum's buying power fades, the public experience of art is impoverished. Basically, what this section is saying, that in the past, having a budget of say like $5 million, $2 million was good enough. Now it's chicken feed. That doesn't even scratch the surface of what they would need in order to buy art. And this is bad because if the museums, which are public displays of this art, the way the general public are going to interact with it and learn from it, can no longer purchase the art, then the public cannot experience it, and thus they cannot take anything from it. There's no value in it anymore. American museums have been hit by a double whammy: art inflammation and a punitive rewriting. So these two things in conjunction are very bad. In 1986 of US tax laws, which destroyed most incentives for the rich to give art away. Tax exemption through donations was the basis on which American museums grew. So this is what used to help them. And now it is all but gone, with predictably catastrophic results in the future. So basically, these tax laws took this incentive away from them, which is bad, because the public can no longer get them at the museums. Thus, in a historic fit of legislative folly, the government began to starve its museums just at the moment when the art market began to paralyze them. So, two bad things happened at once. Basically, this law passed, which made rich people not want to donate art to the museums, and the art market decided to hike up all the prices in art. So, in both cases, these two things individually and working together are going to mean that the general public can no longer access art. What is the main point of this passage? Essentially, the art industry is bad for the general public because it puts a price on art that is so high, museums cannot afford it, and rich people aren't donating to museums anymore via pieces of art, so the public cannot access it and garner any meaning, any nuance from it. So, if you can't garner any meaning or nuance from the art, especially as the general public, it has no value. It's devaluing the art. So, this whole shift into the art industry is really bad in general. Now let's tackle the questions. Starting off with 1, the hypothetical example of a commodity market in books, paragraph 2, is intended to clarify the point that A, we have come to assume that art is prohibitively expensive. B, society's notion of the value of art has changed in the past few decades. C, New York has become the world center of cultural commercialism. Or D, the commercialization of art limits the public's access to culture. I'll give you a moment to answer that. Pause the video. I've highlighted in pink what that section they're referring to is. And now, you aren't always going to have to refer directly back to the passage, especially if you got in the main idea of every paragraph. And what did we say was the main idea of this paragraph? Essentially, that putting a price on art is bad. It locks people out, they cannot contemplate it, they can't get any meaning from it, and overall, it's just bad for the general public. So, which of these answer choices is going to match up with that? If you guess D, you would be correct. And now, as I mentioned before, the Jack Weston extension on Chrome is going to show you this explanation. You'll see right here, it lists the Jack Weston, and then this is the AMC standard solution. So at the top, they go through a little blurb of why they think this is right, but in my opinion, this is because it lines up exactly with what the main idea was that we were talking about when we were reading. Essentially, this whole commercialization of art is really bad. Now let's go over why the other answers are wrong. So we have come to assume that art is prohibitively expensive, which, like, yeah, sure, that's a point they make, but is it the main idea? Like, why would they specifically include the idea of the books in this paragraph? It's not necessarily to show that it's expensive, because it's not putting a price on the book necessarily. And then society's notion of the value of art has changed in the past few decades, which, like, yeah, sure, that's true, but is that the point they're trying to make? Not really. They're saying that if multimillionaires and investment trusts are fighting over these one copy of each book, it's going to then take it away from the general public, and it's not going to be good for the general public. So that's not the answer choice either. New York has become a world center of cultural commercialization, which, like, yeah, true in the real world, and like maybe even in this passage, but that is not a main point at all. That's just something they put in there because, like, you could maybe argue it, but it doesn't really match up with what we're talking about, especially with this point. So D is going to, in general, be lining up the best. All right, next question. If gifts to art museums from wealthy donors increased, this would most weaken the author's assertion that A, actions of the US government have harmed museums, B, a credit economy has transformed the art world, C, the public's reaction to modern art has been distorted, D, as a museum's buying power decreases, public art appreciation also decreases. And now, do you remember what I told you about rephrasing questions so that they make sense to you? I would do that with this question here. So basically, they're saying, if this occurred, what would happen to this? But this is a weird half of a sentence, basically. This would most weaken the author's assertion. What about just this would go against the author's idea that? Basically, whatever is against it. You don't want to support the main idea, you want to contradict it. Give you a moment, choose your answer, and we'll go over this. Let's pick our answer. Do you remember when we were talking about that last paragraph about that US tax law? Well, what was the whole point of that? Basically, when the US put this law in, it destroyed the incentives for rich people to give art away to museums. But this question prompt is basically saying, the gifts to art museums from wealthy donors increase. So it's doing the exact opposite of the law that was mentioned in the last paragraph. So it'd be the opposite of the main idea of this paragraph, which would thus be answer A. And now let's go over the other answer choices and why they were wrong. So B, a credit economy has transformed the art world. How in any way does the idea of gifts to museums contradict that? Nobody's contradicting that. I would say they're not even really related. It doesn't seem relevant in any sense, not to the question, not to the passage. So I'm gonna ignore this. C, the public's reaction to modern art has been distorted. Well, yeah, that seems to be the case, but that's when we're talking about things like, you know, what people used to be able to do in 1960 about anybody walking into a museum, and they wouldn't even care about what something might have cost in an auction. But that has to do much more with, like, the commercialization of things rather than gifts increasing. So this also doesn't seem very relevant. And then D, as a museum's buying power decreases, public appreciation for art also decreases. Even that's a stretch. So the only logical and concise answer seems to be A. Next question. According to the passage, art inflation has harmed the public life of art, paragraphs 3 and 4, by 1, distorting the viewer's responses to paintings and sculpture, 2, depreciating the value of gifts previously given to museums, 3, diminishing the buying power of art museums. I'll give you a second. The way I think is best to answer these kinds of questions is honestly finding them in the actual passage themselves. So let's start off with 1, right? Distorting the viewer's responses to paintings and sculpture. And I can remember this really, really clearly, even if I can't find this in the passage, because we went through and we highlighted what we thought was important, but also because we were basically rephrasing everything in layman's terms. So this sticks out to me. I know this is probably one of the right answers, but let's just find it just in case. So we can see 1 right here at the top of paragraph 3. It has distorted the ground of people's reaction to painting and sculpture, and that is because of the art market boom. So I'm going to say this is probably correct because the commercialization aka the art market boom, has caused this to occur according to the passage. So let's X out anything that isn't to do with that in the answer choices. So A doesn't have that. And yeah, that's the only one. So let's move on to number 2. Depreciating the value of gifts previously given to museums. Now, just off the top of my head, I don't remember them saying anything about this in the actual passage. But let's see if we can find it or maybe contradict it even. So, depreciating the value of gifts given to museums basically means lowering the value of gifts. When I think about gifts and stuff, again, I'm thinking about this last paragraph, right? There's no depreciation of gifts mentioned in here. Instead, it's saying they completely took away the gifts because there's no incentive to give them. So I don't think this is any answer because 1, it's not in the passage, and 2, it seems to be using this phrase that's trying to almost like confuse us because there's no depreciation of value, no lessening of value. It's just that rich people aren't giving the gifts to museums anymore. So I don't think it's 2. So let's get rid of that. And let's get rid of the answer choices with that in it. And so that just leaves us with number 3, diminishing the buying power of museums. Okay, I do recall this from the paragraph and all of our layman's terms of this. However, let's see what we can say about this. So, commercialization of art increases, so people are putting more prices on art. And thus, according to this answer, the buying power of art museums is going down. So let's see if there's any paragraph that says this, and bingo. Paragraph 4 is all about basically as the museum's buying power fades, the public art experience is impoverished, and that's because their buying budgets are chicken feed now. It's not anything worthwhile. They're so expensive they can't buy anything anymore. So answer C seems good to me. And yep, question 27. The passage suggests that the problems experienced by museums hurt the public's enjoyment of art because the museums A. have no budget with which to buy new works, B. must pay higher insurance on their collections, C. must shorten their viewing hours, or D. cannot afford to buy as many works. Take a second, pick your answer. Alright, let's go through this. So, have no budget with which to buy their new works. That sounds familiar, so could possibly be B. must pay higher insurance for their collections. I don't remember anything about insurance. C. must shorten their viewing hours. Also, doesn't really seem to be anywhere in the passage. Seems like a jump they're just trying to make you make it in your head, so doesn't seem like the answer I want. D. can't afford to buy as many works. Could also be one of the issues because I do remember them mentioning this in the passage, but it seems to line up kind of with answer choice A. So they have no budget with which to buy new works, or they can't afford to buy as many works. And so let's go back to the question, right? What about the problems that museums have are going to hurt the public's enjoyment of art? Let's think about it in the eyes of the public. Why would the public care if they have no budget? That's not the public's real problem. They're not really thinking about the money like that, are they? But if the museums can't buy as many works, that seems to be more of an issue for the public. And this is a really convoluted question because they seem like really close answer choices. But I'm going to go with D. Let's think back to the passage as well and try to explain this answer a little bit more because I know that this question can trip a lot of people up. But we're thinking about the public's enjoyment of art, right? And so do you remember in paragraph 4 where they talk about if the buying power of the museum fades, the public experience of art is impoverished? And now you can argue that that is for A as well, but think about why that would affect the public. If you cannot buy as many works as before, you can't open the public up to experience a bunch of art, which is going to be worse for them. Not really the budget itself. Okay, and last question, which of the following statements, if true, would most weaken the argument made in the passage? A. Most people have no interest in the cost of paintings they see in museums. B. Museums have begun raising funds to supplement their buying power. C. There are only about 1,000 paintings that have sold for more than $10 million. D. A 19th century painting has recently sold for less than $1 million. Take a second, answer. Let's rephrase this question so that it's a little simpler to digest. Which of the following statements, if true, would most weaken the argument made in the passage? Alright, so basically, which of these answer choices goes against what the author is arguing in this passage? I distinctly remember answering this question, so I'm going to walk you through exactly what I did just to be realistic with you guys, because these are the types of questions that give me a little bit of pause sometimes. So, A, most people have no interest in the cost of paintings they see in museums. Maybe, I don't know, could be contradictory, maybe not. Let's keep reading. B, museums have begun raising funds to supplement their buying power. How would that weaken an argument, though? Wouldn't that support the argument that basically museums have bad funding, they can't really buy anything anymore? So that's in paragraph 4, and then 5 is saying that they don't get gifts anymore. So yeah, they seem to have to increase their funds in order to supplement their buying power. So this seems like it supports. All right, now C, there are only about 1,000 paintings that have sold for more than $10 million. What is this contradicting? Is it supposed to contradict something in paragraph 1 about people talking about in the past that paintings used to not sell for that much? People thought it was crazy? Because this still supports the idea that people are buying paintings for a lot of money. So this doesn't really seem to be contradicting anything. So let's get rid of that. D, a 19th century painting has recently sold for less than $1 million. Okay, I mean, that kind of lines up with the previous answer choice, doesn't it though? Not every painting is going to be priced at that much, but like, it could. So this is not really contradicting anything. This is also kind of in line with our previous answer, which we already X'd out. So I don't think that's the answer either. That leaves us with A, right? This is the type of question that when I read it for the first time, I didn't really know what my response was going to be because it seemed like a weird question and a weird answer choice. But by doing this elimination method, you can get the right answer. I hope that helped out even a little bit. I was trying to keep it realistic with what my thought process is like when I'm reading these articles. But yeah, let me know if you guys have any questions. I'm not super active on YouTube. I'll try to be a little bit more since a lot of people have been asking for more long form content. But if you have any specific questions for me and you need like a quick answer, try reaching out to me over on TikTok. If you comment on one of my videos, I'll probably see it and respond that way. But yeah, I hope this has helped. If you've got any more questions, please let me know and have a good day.